All right, I think that's everybody. Welcome this morning for me, and I think this morning for our guest, Insidious. I thought, so the reason why he contacted me, I think this is fair to share, is that he's like, here's just some advice about Zoom. And then he said, by the way, I also am Mormon, right? So this is going to be kind of an interesting, I guess, Mormon themed. But also, it doesn't have to be. Feel free to, as always, if you have any questions, go ahead and send me one in the chat. But I thought I would give people like a little bit of background about kind of the way I perceive Mormonism as it's practiced today. So my family is Mormon, and I have like polygamous ancestors. I have, a great 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 grandfather or whatever that had like at least several wives. I don't think I ever had one who had 20 or something. But he was a well-respected individual in his community. In fact, I think he is the same one who founded a city in California before being called back to Utah, when there was kind of, I guess they call it the Utah War. You can look this up on Wikipedia if you want. But I have this kind of ancestral chain of religious thought. And so I think a lot of people might wonder, like, what are my feelings about it? And I don't think we've talked about it before. And we'll talk with Insidious about it a little bit. But I thought I'd just relate a story. So my dad had a tooth problem. I think it was a crown, and I think it was from an injury when he was young. And it just ended up getting really bad. The tooth cracked underneath, and they basically said, we can't save the tooth. Now, he let it get that far, right? He probably could have saved the tooth if he had gone in earlier, but then it did get to the point where they couldn't save the tooth. And so maybe that was kind of his first mistake. Second mistake is they took the tooth out and there was infection. So that's what I mean by he let it get that far. Like if he had gone in earlier, there wouldn't have been as much infection. So they weren't able to put the implant in right away. Instead, they had to scrape out all the infection and do a bone graft, right? So then that had to heal before they could put in the implant for his new fake tooth, right? And then they gave him one of these little flippy tooth guys, and he didn't wear it. In fact, he kept losing it, and he didn't wear it. And he kind of came in a huff like 2 months later to do his implant. And the dentist or oral surgeon, whoever, who was like doing his implant, kind of looked at him right away and was like, have you been wearing your tooth? And he's like, no, not really. And he's that type, right? He's like a narcissist guy. He doesn't kind of care what he looks like, but he thinks he looks great all the time. That's the other funny thing, right? So he said, well, we can't do your scheduled procedure today because I had expected your tooth space to be the same size. In fact, that's why I gave you the little tooth flipper. And, I asked my dad this. I was like, why didn't you wear your tooth flipper? Because, this is what I had guessed. And I had correctly guessed this, that the reason why he didn't wear his tooth flipper is because he's so kind of like narcissistic, let's say, that he didn't care. He thought that the only purpose for this tooth flipper was aesthetic purposes, was just so he could walk around and look like he actually had a tooth in his mouth. And since he didn't care, he didn't wear it. Now, his dentist or his oral surgeon didn't explain to him, explicitly that it actually had another medical purpose. In fact, that was its primary purpose, which was to keep the teeth from closing in the gap, from moving around the tooth and just closing in that gap like the teeth just naturally do. So then it's actually been, he just recently got the implant, but it's been over a year since he's been doing this tooth thing because he kind of keeps messing things up. And the kind of analogy here is that I think for a lot of Mormons and probably religious people in general, and maybe just everybody who kind of like generally naturally likes to support the status quo, they assume rules are there for a specific reason. They just naturally assume, oh, it's got to be X. It's got to be, we have this, let's say, Mormon commandment or something, or Christian commandment, or, Muslim commandment. We have this. And so therefore, what we must really do is like hate infidels, hate Americans, or we have to, even though it says love each other, also has some stuff about judging people. So like, I'm going to fixate on that. So just this kind of, when people take something that's religious and they just imbue it with their own meaning. They just actually assume. You know, the commandment itself, I don't think in any of these religions really says, go ahead and kill Americans. I don't think it says that. It doesn't say that in any Mormon commandment either. But it's the people who take that kind of information and kind of like interpret it in their own way. Just like my dad interpreted, you know, like, hey, you're being asked to wear this tooth flipper. And he interpreted it in the way of, oh, it's just aesthetic. I don't care for that reason, so I'm just not going to do the thing, right? So I guess that's kind of too how I feel, not just with the other people in Mormonism, but myself. Often I've been asked to do something where it's like the tooth flipper, and I honestly think this is kind of stupid, and I don't know why I'm doing this. But as I have kind of started to just do it, you know, and that's only been in the past really 4 or 5 years that I've actually started to practice Mormonism, I think, with like kind of a real soft heart, I guess, about it, like an open mind about it, that I've been like oddly amazed at like how it makes my life better. So that's kind of like why I do it, is because even though I don't understand why the tooth flipper I'm being asked to wear like the equivalent of this fake tooth, that's why I actually end up doing it, is because I don't know what the reason is, but I kind of am just testing it out and seeing maybe there's a good reason. Yeah, so Insidious is our guest, and he's also Mormon. And what do you think about that tooth flipper thing? Do you think, is that how you
I
feel about Mormonism?
I think that's exactly right. We don't understand to some point some of these commandments, even the guidelines that are set out to us. You know, when it comes down to even caffeine, it's not specifically written to not drink caffeine, but it comes down to what's healthy for your body and what's going to become a dependent. You know, I drink caffeine like a madman, but
Yeah.
like it's another here's another example is, you know, I was in the military and we have a lot of labels on things, like silly labels that will keep people from getting hurt, right? You'd think, don't stick your head in this fan because it'll chop your head off. Yet there's a label that says, don't stick your hand or head near this fan. And it's like, okay, well, some of us will get it. Like, okay, that's obvious. It's poison. We don't want to drink it. But some other people, you know, just kind of need that little bit more understanding. And I think if we look at it from a point of what's healthy for us spiritually, physically, and emotionally, if you want to call it that, then that's what church guidelines always are. I mean, all church religions do that to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Try to give commandments that are really there to help us. Now, there are men in the world that will twist those for their own desires and devices, but we also got to be really cognizant and at a spiritual level to understand the differences between man's law and God's law.
You know, and in fact, that's actually like, we'll keep saying Mormon. The full name of the church they keep wanting us to use is Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But it's interesting because sometimes I just call it Restored Church of Jesus, because that's the religious belief, is that it is the Church of Jesus that was restored by Joseph Smith. That's like the quick and dirty explanation, right? But even Restored Church of Jesus theology is that whenever basically there's a chance for people to kind of come in, sneak in, and oppress others, including using the Restored Church of Jesus, the Mormon church, and to use their positions of power within that church to oppress others, they will do it. That's just the natural tendency of man. So I kind of think it's funny that that's the theology. And we often point to, for instance, the Catholic Church and some of these popes, you know, who seemed like not very spiritual men, you know, during the Middle Ages or whatever, who were basically just waging war and, you know, like raping women. You know, we don't think of that as being super spiritual or following Jesus. And we say, you know, that's why, is because they kind of got corrupted. But our own leaders can get corrupted, and they often do. Now, like, it's also kind of a religious belief that, like, well, it's the church as a whole is not going to be like led astray. Kind of like in the military, there are corrupt people. In police forces, there are corrupt people. But the belief being that maybe the institutions themselves are redeemable. And that's kind of the church's position there, is that the people will never be corrupt people, will never be allowed to get up to a high enough position within the church to really wreak havoc. But the question is, like, what is the tolerance for that? You know, like, there've been plenty of people that are excommunicated that were like in the very top, most like 12 apostle kind of range. They're just like underneath the president or the prophet of the church who have been excommunicated, right? So it's like, I mean, sometimes I think that makes your average Mormon a little bit uncomfortable to think about, but you know, that is the theology. So even our church institution has these issues.
Hmm. Absolutely. And we, my wife and I just had a discussion this morning about this because I was in an argument with one of my cousins who has fallen away from the church because of his research in the history of the church. And he ran into this kind of a problem where man decided to, try to interpret the laws that they thought, and well, they were wrong, but then they were rectified. But he was focused on that happened. He was kind of holding a light to the church should be perfect, and but it's not. But the church is perfect. It's the people that aren't perfect. Everybody is not perfect. And I'll speak in more specifics. The issue at hand was allowing blacks to hold the priesthood, and at the time they were allowed to hold the priesthood, but then it was taken away. But then it was rectified and brought back because of this type of discrimination, and just because these people were changing those kind of policies and in a sense smitten later on for doing that. It's had a ripple effect even to this day, and to my cousin, and we kind of talked about, my wife and I talked about that, and just the when it's fixed, when you look back in the Old Testament, the New Testament, you see how man can quickly change what they believe the commandments should be, and even the teachings and the commandments have changed and evolved because of our comprehension has become a lot better for God's purpose. If we were to apply the same commandments as we have today to the people in the Old Testament, they would be like, what? They wouldn't, don't kill, what would, don't sacrifice animals anymore. Like, it had to be done in phases to adjust to us, because we are that childlike, in that type of thinking. We can't comprehend everything God has planned.
And that's kind of the interesting thing. One of the things I like about our religion is that it is a little bit more mystical. You really do have to kind of keep an open mind, where some of these other like religious doctrines are just like, it's XYZ. Those are the simple answers or whatever. And that's kind of like, to me, like my dad and the tooth, it's like, I see that you have a fixed idea, like you came to this with prior beliefs, and you're trying to take the new information you receive, all new information you receive, in fact, and trying to just have it comport with your prior beliefs. And I think that's very common. It's very common inside and outside the church. I think this is the sorts of things that you see where it's like, I actually don't think the person, I think it was Brigham Young, the prophet who it's Brigham Young University is named after him and stuff. Prophet who took the people from the Ohio region, I think Iowa region, and then to Utah, right? But he was the one, and the official church stance on this is that it was just a mistake, that it was a misinterpretation of scripture. But there are still Mormons who will do contortionistic logic in order to try to make it seem as if that was like a good thing, or it was
Right.
somehow good for African Americans, or somehow good for the people to be persecuted. And you're like, this is weird, but like that, I don't know why it's easier for them to do that than to just believe and understand and acknowledge it was just a mistake. They would rather, but I guess I understand too, because I follow on Twitter a police apologist, basically. He was a former law enforcement, and it's just every single thing that kind of gets mentioned, he just is like, I think he cannot cope with the fact that there are actually people who dislike the police so much that they don't want there to be police. He's like, oh, what about a world without police? He just kind of tries to excuse them. And it's like, just have an open enough mind to see this perspective. If you see this perspective, if you see another perspective, and this is kind of like how I think I like started dipping my toes into like the idea of empathy. If you see somebody else's perspective, then you just see so much more truth to the world, right? You're able to see truth in them, and you're able to see like more truth in you and truth in the universe. So I think that's what like kind of like made me get like a little bit more spiritual. But what about you, Insidious?
Yeah, spirituality and empathy. Wow, that's something that's pretty wild. In my time, it's been very difficult for me to understand empathy on a very large scale and small scale. I mean, even my wife and I struggle, but um, I find that it's harder for me, and it could be the pride in me. I don't know. It's harder for me to have that constant spirituality with me, and I'm not sure if it's because of the the empathy thing with me. I don't know if that's why, because at times where I have felt the Spirit, it's been as much as I can count on one hand. I have felt the Spirit, and I actually felt the feelings, which blew my mind. And it's a testament to me that the Spirit can work many miracles in any way. Just because I have a lack of empathy, genetically and in my brain, doesn't mean that there can't be a small miracle that the Spirit or God can kind of open that avenue up for me to experience, and then for sure confirm my belief system in that spirituality between myself and our Father in heaven, that okay, yeah, he can work miracles because I felt this that I've never felt before. And I was kind of worried about it. I was like, what the heck is this? Is this what people feel all the time? And but I was also the most spiritual point in my life, and I need to go back that, but in a way I'm kind of afraid to. I don't know about feeling those kind of things. I'm so used to not.
Yes, that's kind of funny. So, and I do believe that, like, number one, it's also kind of Mormon theology that one of the reasons, like, there's a Mormon scripture that says, behold, I give unto you weakness, that you may be humble. And my grace is sufficient for those of you that humble yourselves and come unto me. That's like a rough paraphrase. And so there's an idea that, like, in Mormon theology, that, like, some people really are meant to have a weakness, whatever it is. Like you're weak in empathy, I'm weak in empathy, like disorders, mental disorders, physical disorders, emotional disorders, whatever the disorder is, psychological disorders, that some of that is like you're given this in order to kind of struggle and like overcome it. I know that's like an unpopular idea now, because people talk about things like disability porn, where it's like, oh, you're so inspiring to me. And they're like, I'm not your inspiration, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is like a thing. I just learned it on Twitter like 6 months
Wow.
ago. Yeah, it's a thing.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, but it's like also interesting that a lot of people think that like psychopaths are the exception to this. And in fact, I kind of ran into like some issues with a church institution. We'll just keep it that general, right? That said, the problem actually and me is not with like the things that you're saying. In fact, the stuff that you did isn't even that terrible. It's more the way that you feel about it that's the problem. Like, we really can't have you doing X, because you don't feel Y, right? And I was like, this seems crazy, because I have told you, like, I have this mental disorder that like affects the way that I feel. Like, I am incapable of feeling certain ways. And in fact, one of the ways they kind of suggested was guilt. They're like, you don't feel sufficiently guilty. And I was like, I don't know if you have never heard about my disorder, but it is, it is like,
Right.
without a conscience, right? Is the Robert Hare book title, without a conscience.
Yep.
So like, what do you expect from me here? Right. So I think it's kind of interesting, because sometimes I'm like, well, yes, it's obviously been interesting to live life this way and to kind of struggle with it and to get a little bit better. in the past few years to get a little bit better and kind of better about certain things, not better about everything. I don't think maybe there isn't a way to get better about everything and be completely normal. But it's I also think it's been interesting for people around me, including like really well-meaning Mormons, to have to like engage with me and understand that this is true about me, and like have to reconcile it with like what they think about like, but this is not just Mormons, it's all of Christians or whatever. Like how many times has somebody called me like a soulless, you're going to hell type situation,
Mm-hmm.
Christians, because of like my mental disorder. And it's like, I did not choose this, guys.
Right.
I cannot choose just to feel guilt. I cannot just like flip a switch and choose to feel empathy.
Right. Like we're predispositioned to fail. That's something that's very interesting to me, because I follow a lot of people on Reddit, and we talked about religion. Somebody brought that up, and one person said he follows Luciferism because his, and this was a sociopath Reddit subreddit, and he gave the logic behind it, because he lacks that empathy or whatever, and it aligns with his goals. And I'm like, well, that's silly, because you're still making those choices, and you're giving a crutch to your mental awareness of being a sociopath, I guess, in that sense. But a lot of people just think that they don't know how to take us, because we don't have that capability. I mean, I feel like we have an advantage, because in some sense we can have a perspective allowing us to see other people's point of view for the
Yes.
feelings. We see that it hurts, but they cannot. I have not met one person, nor counselor, to even understand in the slightest bit of what we go through. But there's always that tip of the iceberg where they're thinking, oh, well, this person's just plain evil, because of what they did in their life and all this kind of stuff. And in the church, I think the church saved me, because if I didn't have the church, I probably would be evil. I probably would just do my own thing without a leash. And but I'm glad I haven't, and that's just another testimony to me that I firmly believe that the church's doctrine and sort of black and white teachings and guidelines to follow kind of helped me, be a better person, not out of empathy or feeling bad or good, but just for doing good and not as much bad.
Yeah. Which I think it does help, because I look at other people around me, and some people, who are just like me, have like criminal records or things that they're now struggling with, right? Because it's like, well, what are my career options given this criminal record, And so there is a benefit to that, like there was a little bit less destruction. But I also think with the church, there's something like, there's almost like a indelible kind of like memory of something, that like church participation helps with. For instance, like I have two little relatives, nephews and nieces. My brother calls them nieflings, right? So I have two little nieflings. We'll keep the gender out of it. That are they're like kind of sociopathic, right? And one of them in particular is really hard for people to deal with. She's like very brash. She's just very kind of like in your face about it, a little bit. And I think the natural reaction for people in the face of a child like that is to kind of like hold back, to be more reserved, to be like cold to her. And I keep reminding my siblings and, their spouses and like my parents, I said, we have to show her love in order for her to know how important it's going to be in her life. Otherwise she will not know, right?
Exactly.
So with the church teachings, it's like this emphasis on love, this emphasis on like Jesus loves you. I think this is like the real thing. And she actually was, like recently, like went through like, we'll keep it a little bit more generic than I was about to do. She went through this like additional like church kind of process, I guess, like pathway And then, so she was talking about it on Zoom. And, you know, it's like she has a kind of an interesting view of things. She definitely does. I don't think she feels it as deeply as you would guess a normal child to feel it as deeply. You know, like her feelings are like more shallow. But I hope that that memory of just like her family, like loving her, will like be kind of like a little bit like a lighthouse, you know, like whenever she kind of gets a little bit lost. And I think that's the kind of sad thing about some people who have our disorder, is that they do get lost and they don't have as much that lighthouse. And I think that's when you end up really struggling. So I've always appreciated the role of the church, especially when it's like, you know, my own parents could be so unreliable, you know, when it comes to love and support, right? And so to have kind of this idea that there was like a heavenly father who was there and loved me, and a Jesus character who loved me, I think was really important for me.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You know, my parents as well. Uh, it seems, you know, when I think back, I try to think about any of the good things, good feelings that maybe have been created through that rearing process. I, I, and I don't see a lot of the understanding, because I think they were just pissed every day because I was always obnoxious and did what I want, burned things down. I did just really horrible things. And, and I think they were just ready for me to leave. But the church, like you said, was a beacon to kind of hone me back in from the path that I kept going off of. And I mentioned this to one of my friends, that it seems like I am continually falling off the path just at the normal people, and I'm just kind of comparing myself because I feel like I am. And but when I stay true to the gospel and to the love that our Heavenly Father does have for us, even though I don't know what that would look like, I kind of have an idea of what I would like it to be. And if it could be like that, then I want to, then I want that, right?
Yeah.
And so that's enough to push me back onto that path, and it's a continual thing for me. Otherwise, before I know it, I'll be out in the woods, you know, off this path, and you know, in trouble, like I
Yeah.
have in the past. And it's just, it is difficult, but I think that's the challenge. Like, everybody has their own challenge, their own vice that's going to constantly push them. The challenge that might be different than other people's. You know, some might be losing a child. That's their challenge. That's their, and I don't mean to be insensitive, because I just am insensitive. But the the other thing is, we all have our own challenges, and I think we have to understand that my struggle, whatever amount that is going to be equal to a lot of everybody else's challenges, but with different challenges, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
Um,
Yes, I agree. So can you tell us like a little bit about, you know, just it can be as brief as you want, but like, have you been diagnosed? If not, what are the characteristics or something that have caused you to self-identify, or what prompted you to self-identify?
oh dear. The coming off of the path, and I was I was off the path, and what I mean by that is socially, as well as physically here in my family life. I just about lost my family because of things I was doing. I have a lot of children, and I love them. I always wanted them. And 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 for some reason I was going off on this path. And when I came back, you know, one of those absolutes that I had to do was to get help, to go to a psychologist and figure out what the hell's wrong with me. So I was like, you know what, whatever. I'll try anything. I'll do anything. You know, because I was in the war back in '04. You know, I have gone to psychologists, and they try to peg PTSD on me and all this kind of business. And I've always struggled with that idea, like PTSD. Yeah, see, I'm not telling you everything, so I can't trust that diagnosis. So I
Mm,
went to, I had four counselors, one local, one online, one on the VA, two online, sorry, and then the VA, so four. And each one of them, you know, they like, you're a narcissist. And I was like, okay, yeah, I guess I could believe that. Another one, you know, ran me through a series of tests that took a long time. And over about a course of a week or two, he decided, you know, you show really, really high signs of ASPD with a specifier in psychopathy because of everything that you've done, because of how you are now and the way you think now. And so it is a diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
And because of mistakes, that's how I got there. That's how I got to that. It wasn't a curiosity. I never even gave it a thought. I just was living life.
Yeah. And did that surprise you? Like when I guess you probably didn't realize what it was, but had to go home and kind of look it up, and it
Right. I
surprised
had
you?
to look it up
Yeah.
because the immediate thought was, what does everybody think when they hear about, oh, you're a psychopath? They think of what movies portray us as murderers,
Yeah.
serial killers. Even when you Google it, that's all you get is serial killers and just all this negative stuff. And okay, maybe I was on that path. I don't know, but I changed it, and I looked it up, and then it was like a relief. I felt like, oh, well, this makes a lot of sense. And one of my counselors, he's like, okay, well, just to be honest, there is no treatment for this. I just want to be frank with you. So we can just talk if that's what you want to do, but there's nothing that can really help you. And I thought, well, whatever, that's fine. We can just talk. And that's kind of where we're at.
Mm-hmm. What about like your family? You know, like have you disclosed the diagnosis to anybody else?
Yes. My wife, and just to be honest, right? That was the other thing I was trying to change, was to be honest. And that has been very, very challenging, because sometimes now I'm too honest, and I don't see how that's a problem, because of what I've done. And you know, she's met with the ideas that, oh, I'm just saying this because I'm blaming it on a diagnosis or whatever, have some scapegoat instead of taking responsibility for my actions, and which is so far from the truth. I'm just kind of excited, like, hey, this makes so much more sense than anybody's ever been able to tell me. And now that I have that, I kind of want to share it, right?
Yeah.
But I overshare to her sometimes. And my counselor's also been saying, you know, you got to understand, she's still hurting from things that you've done. And okay, you tell me that, but when am I going to know that she's done hurting? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's my way of thinking. I can't understand when is the right time to say this or to not say this, or to not go so deep into it. So I kind of backed off of it, to be honest with her, and just been living and trying to, you know, curb my actions. And I also told my family, because I felt like I owed it to them. You know, I made their life pretty crappy. I'll be honest, I did.
Mm-hmm.
It was fun for me, and I could see that it probably wasn't fun for them, now that I have a bunch of children. So I told them, and they didn't really have anything to say. My mom did say something like, you know, you're a good person. You don't think that you're a bad person. And I'm like, I'm not saying I'm a bad person. And I'm not, and maybe because of how Hollywood's portrayed us, maybe that's what she was going off of.
Yeah.
That I'm this master manipulator killer guy. And she's like trying to convince me that I'm not a bad person. I'm like, I'm not telling you I am. I don't know where you're getting that from. I'm just telling you this truth, I guess. So.
Yeah, it's just the truth. But I have talked to so many people like us who have like gone through a similar thing where they've told family, and the family's reactions have just been like, you know, like this is worse than death. You know, must be what it was like 100 years ago for people to say I'm gay, you know, to their parents or
Oh yeah,
whatever. Like,
sure.
we'd rather have you dead. type situation. Or we're so clueless how to deal with this, but I understand, to me, it's just also like when I think of it and when I self-identify as it, or, like when I eventually got diagnosed, it's just like, this is just a diagnosis, guys. Like why such the stigma? Why such the stigma? And
Absolutely.
the idea, I think it's partly because, for normal people, this is like how they judge their own humanity, right? I have empathy, therefore I'm human. And I don't think that's necessarily true. Like, I think humanity is so much more rich than empathy, but I think that is kind of a little shortcut that they take. So we have just so we have a minute and a half, a little over a minute. Is there anything else you want to share with us in this last minute?
Yeah, we all have choice, and I think that's the important thing that we can go off of is our choice, and we need to constantly find those avenues where our choices are going to be built based on good behavior, good moral standpoint, because we have a broken moral compass, and we do need some kind of guidance. And even though society is so quick to throw us away, there still is help out there from the church in that respect, I think. So
yeah. So you're still pro-church. And then we have a quick question. I wonder if we can get to it. Someone says, is there a relationship between psychopathy and miser and hoardiness traits, both related as well to obsessive compulsive disorder? Do you feel like you kind of are miserly or hoardy? I could say yes. I'm especially hoardy about Chick-fil-A.
Yeah, in a way I am. Yeah. And I'm definitely really OCD.
Yes.
Very, very irritably so OCD.
Yes, like things have to go in an order. I think that might just be it, but maybe we'll have you on in the future if you don't mind.
Yeah, that'd be good.